In this video, I'm going to show you how to work with red. And when you're using shading, red quickly goes into maroon and purple and blue. And so you'll see how to work with all of those colors as a result of working with red. Now, the first thing that you always have to decide is where is the light coming from? And I often, by default, choose for the light to be coming from the sort of top left-hand corner. You can obviously choose anywhere in the picture for the light to be coming from. So we're going to start working with this t-shirt. I'm going to be working with my brush really large here. I'm working with this custom watercolor brush, round brush, and I've chosen this red out of the very middle of the iconic palette, which was one of the defaults on my iPad. I just start to color like this. I'm not worrying too much about the outlines because this is just an example, and you can see how I'm just adding in. Quite often, as I've mentioned before, I'll just go in and put in a whole layer of the red and start like that, and then we start to get the streakiness, build up some good red color. I go all the way to the bottom with this red, and I try to get all the way to the edges because I don't want it to be pale, just because I didn't want to get all the way to the black outline. So there we go, we've got our first lot of red. So this edge here will get the maximum amount of light. Conversely, here and the bottom of the sleeve there will be rounded and underneath the arm, so it'll be much darker. Then we'll tend to get a whole lot of light across the sort of, if the belly is slightly rounded and sticking out, that will be paler. And then as we get to these bottom corners here, it'll tend to darken again. We'll also end up with darker tones under there. We'll end up with darker tones within the armholes. And just generally heading this way, we will end up with things getting darker in general. Now that we've realized where the light is coming from, and we know that it's going to be darker as we go into the base of the arm hole, shall we say, we're going to need to change colors. So I usually go for a maroony color like this one, this dark reddish kind of maroon in the default comic palette that came with my iPad. And I start working like this. Often I'll reduce the size of my brush a little bit because now I'm not covering such large areas. And I'll work with a slight curve because I want to get the sense of curvature of the garment. And I'll work here as well, again curving around, because that's how I want to show what's going on. So if we put a little bit of curving in here, curving. And what I tend to find is that as we get towards the bottom here, again there'll be curving around the bottom, and around the bottom here I'll put some in like that as well. So it becomes a little bit of a process of trial and error to get what you're looking for. Now I'm going to go in, I'm actually going to use blue, so I'll choose this blue off the back of my Skin Tones palette. I use it all over the place. And once I start using blue, I actually reduce the opacity of my brush down to about 10%, because blue has very powerful effects quite quickly. And then I just start adding the blue in on the top. Adding it along like this, all the way along. And one gets to the point where you have to start adjusting things because they're not necessarily looking exactly how you want them. So then you start to go back and forth a little bit with the different colors. So now that I've got this sense of a few tones coming along, what I want to do is punch up the red a bit. So I'm going to go back to my red in the center of my iconic palette, and I'll go back up to 20% here and start working into the top of this. And then also into the center here where the stomach would be. I'm working just a little bit round in here because I want this to be brighter and more solid. And just clearing up this sort of patchiness here. So I can clear up all the patchiness across the top of the shoulders. And what's going to end up happening is I'm going to have to do that blending process as well. So if I go and I press and hold to change color here. Oh, not pressing and holding. Yes, press and hold to change color and get into the sort of border regions of where it starts to darken. Then I can go and do this, just start to blend across. And if I go into the darker region here, then I can just get this gentle blend. Similarly here, if I take the very edges, I can blend outwards. Take the darker parts, blend outwards like this. Here, I'm going to blend there. And there. Blending this way again. Just starting to blend a bit. To get a smoother finish for where I'm working. Get rid of some of the streakiness. So you get an idea of how it starts to work. As you can see, the blue gives a very purple tinge to things. And you may or may not want that. If you want to go for it, you can go for a much deeper, darker blue or a purpley blue. But I tend to stick to this one because I find that it does work for me as long as I keep going with 10%. And you can even, in places, you'll find that the color goes almost to black at the very deepest place. So you can, depending on how extreme you want your effects, you can actually go almost to a black tone at the very bottom, and then just keep blending and blending to smooth off the streakiness of it. You can spend as long as you want to doing this blending sort of process, and it can become quite time consuming. But I'm going to stop it here just for the sake of this video. And what I want to show you is the final thing that I do is to go in with something. This looks like an orange, but it's actually it is an orange yellow. It's very good for adding the final light tones. So again, working with my brush at a 10% opacity, this is where I go and put a little bit of a glow onto the places which are really catching the light. So that would be here at the very top of this sleeve, a little bit of a glow on the tummy here, and I can put a bit of a glow onto other places if I want to, just to get a bit of extra light. And then you can go back in again with your red and just tone it down a little bit if you've overdone it. But you can see that it just adds quite a spectacular warmth. Because if you look at any photograph of a red shirt, the tones in red, depending on where they are in the light spectrum, will go from here, there can be almost a yellow or orange tone, right through to the center, which is the deepest, boldest of the reds, and then into the maroons, and finally the blues, and even the dark blacks. To finish off, I'm just going to quickly go over what we can see when we look critically at the process as far as we've got, and then also a recommended process and what can go wrong. So if you look at what we've done here, you can see with a critical eye, we probably need to darken things in the bottom of this sleeve on the far side because it would be darker than the sleeve on the nearest side to the light, given that the light is coming from the top left-hand corner here. So we could certainly darken this side a whole lot. We could also probably darken all the way down this side of the body here, if we wanted to. And we can look at how things would work within the sleeve around an arm sticking out of it, give a little bit of thought to that. So depending also on how big the belly is and how much things curve in underneath the belly, you could extend this dark area a little bit more. So there's certainly extra work that can be done here, but the problem is that one can get a little bit obsessed with getting everything perfect. So let's touch on that quickly. When you first start out with this process, it can be tempting to try and get everything quite smooth and to blend everything well and to get the reds all looking perfect as well. I'd say don't do that. Rather work quickly, picking up your red, going in with it, working as quickly as you can. Starting off with 20% is always a good thing. So working with your red, then shifting to your maroon as you come down. Then going in for your blue at 10%. And then going back to blend. Finally coming in with your orange, also at 10%, just adding a little glow on the top. Work quickly for at least a week and just let your eye attune itself to the process and the things that you like or dislike about where you're getting quickly. And then you'll find you start to adapt your process to come up with something which is more pleasing to you. But if I were to say anything, I would say don't obsess about this. Just start applying the principles and see where they take you.